On this edition of Larry the Golf Guy, we talk with Derek Duncan, who is the architecture editor for Golf Digest and really one of the most knowledgeable people today on golf course architecture. We talk with Derek about how he developed his interest in golf architecture at a young age and how he got his start in the field, which is kind of a funny story. And then we discuss how the biannual top 100 greatest courses rankings are conducted at Golf Digest, which is something he oversees, and how those rankings have changed over time. And then we more broadly talk about how course architecture has evolved over the past 30 years and also touch on the dramatic changes in the accessibility of golf course architectural knowledge for the average golfer, and also the impact of technology. Really a fun conversation. Derek's not only super knowledgeable, but super engaging. He even turns the tables on me a little bit at the end and gets my thoughts on a couple of rating issues for golf courses here in the LA area where I live. So it was great fun. One of my most enjoyable conversations on the podcast, and hope you all enjoy it as well. So, up next on this edition of Larry the Golf Guy, Derek Duncan. Well, welcome everyone to another edition of Larry the Golf Guy. And I am so pleased today to welcome to the program Derek Duncan, who is the architecture editor of Golf Digest and one of the most knowledgeable people in the game about golf architecture, and really looking forward to this conversation. Derek, thank you so much for making the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I was thrilled to get the invitation, so this should be fun.
It'll be a lot of fun. So, as I often like to do with our guests, just to kind of go back to the beginning a little bit and give folks a little context and talk about kind of where you were born. If my notes are right, if my research are right, I should say, I think you were in the Boulder area of Colorado is where you grew
Yeah,
up.
that's right. There's a town about 10 miles outside of Boulder called Longmont. My dad still lives there. That's where I grew up. Went to high school there, so just outside of Boulder. Went to University of Colorado. Go Buffs! Uh, I can say that I was in the. There were many years where I wouldn't say that publicly, but we can now.
Not with right, exactly with Dion and everything.
That's
So,
right.
to talk to us a little bit, kind of how you were first introduced to this great game.
Yeah. Probably like I would imagine most of the guests you've had on your podcast, Larry, through my dad, through my grandfather. Yeah, they used to, play together. I remember being a boy riding around on the cart with them when they would play. I would see my dad's clubs in the garage when I'm just playing around as a little boy, and I would pick up his shoes with the funny spikes on them and that funny thing that flap that covered the shoelaces, and it didn't look like any
Yeah,
other kind of shoes that anybody wore. And I was like, why
right,
would
right.
why would you have this? And you see the ball brush scrubber in the bag and all, the
Yeah,
tees and the
yeah.
wrinkled glove. You just that's all very mysterious. It's very totemic to a young boy who's never actually been on a golf course. So I don't, in a roundabout way, that kind of sort of just piqued my interest in it. And then of course you're like, where does dad go on Saturday and Sunday mornings? Like, why isn't he around here? And as you get older, you understand what it is, and you swing the golf club, and just in a roundabout way, we got into it that way. My stepmother came from a big golfing family. Her two brothers, one was a golf pro, another was a club champion wherever he played in around
Wow.
Colorado, and he and his father, so my grandfather on my stepmother's side, actually wrote a book that came out probably in 1985. It was called The Golf Courses of Colorado,
Oh,
and they
okay.
went around to every. It was mostly public courses. They went around and just wrote little profiles on literally every public golf course in Colorado. So there are 150 golf courses in there or so, and they drive little diagrams of their favorite holes and there's mini reviews. And I just thought that book was so fascinating, and I still
Yeah.
have just a few years ago I tracked down a used copy of it on eBay or something because they're still flying around
Awesome.
out there. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did you play competitively at all growing up, or was it just fun stuff? Or
If you count high school golf, I did.
yeah,
I was
I
on the golf
do. I
team.
do.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. I was on the golf team, and I I was the number one player on our golf team,
Oh,
but that
wow. Okay.
doesn't mean much if you come from the school that I went to. It just means that I was the best of the six kids that went out for the team. So I would get paired up every tournament with the number ones from the other schools in conference. And they're going to shoot 71, and I'll shoot like an 84. So it was pretty humbling experience to go out and see like what other good players did. But it was better than football and getting slammed to the ground with my
Right.
physique. I
Right.
wasn't really built for football, so golf in the fall was a pretty good alternative.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I was the exact same way. I want to talk a little bit, we get into this, about what find so interesting is that your interest in golf architecture and golf courses and books on that seems to have started from an early age. And I'm just fascinated by that. And I know I've seen you mention, I think the course was Lake Valley, which was a Press
Yeah.
Maxwell course
Yep.
with all the,
Yep.
Press Maxwell type, Perry and Press Maxwell type greens and stuff. But how did that interest arise? What piqued it? You would think most young kids, oh, golf's, if they're interested in golf, they want to go play and stuff, and you certainly played. But how did you get this interest in golf courses as from such a young age?
Yeah, I mean, some of it just has to be natural, innate. It's just something, whatever itch inside you that needs to be scratched, and you find something that kind of raises your eyebrows. You tend to follow that, and it was always golf courses with me. Just seeing pictures of golf courses, and maybe it goes back to where I grew up on the Front Range of Colorado. At that time, most of the golf courses had been built in the 60s and 70s, and they were very ordinary. We're not up in the mountains really, and we're not out on the plains where like some really good terrain is. You're kind of near these cities, small cities, and all the golf courses were really similar, just kind of straight fairways, a lot of trees on each side planted that had been planted, a lot of evergreen trees, very small circular greens, and that was just very one-dimensional type of golf. And then of course there'd be all these other courses like Lake Valley that we would go play, which was completely different. That felt like a miniature prairie dunes at the time, and the
Mm,
greens there were so exotic looking. They just had these contours and rolls and shoulders and spin-offs that we just didn't encounter anywhere else. And you would just be terrified of some of the putts you would see. And even some of the fairways, I remember like 8, 9, and 1, they just had these like little prairie dunes, like ripples and rumples in them. And you
yeah.
just didn't get that. Everything was just so flat. The main course that I grew up playing was in Longmont called Twin Peaks. And it was just the most basic, boring golf course that you could ever play. It was very young when I started playing it, so the trees were saplings, the fairways were straight, the rough was like really lush and deep, and the greens were the most really fascinating. I'd like to go back and see it now. It's been 35 years, but there were like these catcher's mitt. You'd have the green surface, and then these mounds that covered like three-quarters of it around the sides and the back. So you'd have all these weird. You'd miss the green by 2 yards. You'd have this weird kind of downhill stance on this chip shot
Mm,
out of rough, and
yeah.
I guess it provided some relief to the flatness. But playing all those golf courses, when that's your baseline, and then you see a picture of a golf course in Palm Springs, or you see pictures of golf courses, in New York or Long Island, and you're just like, that looks amazing. So that
Right.
was sort
Right.
of how I gravitated toward it, and I just became interested in golf courses, geography, who built that golf course, how old is that golf course, those kind of things, and that's probably where my interest in architecture came from.
Yeah, interesting. So I know, just kind of advancing forward a little bit on the timeline, you go to the University of Colorado, and then it sounds like you were in a restaurant selling wine. And
You've done your homework, Larry. That's
well,
right.
I just always find this so interesting how people. I had Joe Passoff on, who I'm sure
Sure.
recently, and we talk about
Yeah.
kind of how he went to Nebraska for law school and the turns he made. So it's so interesting to me for people who are so accomplished as you certainly are in the golf world, how this sort of comes about. But anyway, so you're in a restaurant selling wine, as I understand it, and you met your wife, and I guess she's from Florida,
That's
Gainesville,
right.
and she
Yep.
moved back. So much for selling wine, and you end up going to, I guess she was going to law school at University of Florida, if we're going to Gainesville. So,
That's it. Yep.
you moved back there, and there probably at that time not a heavy demand for sommeliers in Gainesville. So,
Yeah.
what was
Precisely
happening?
zero
So, what were
demand.
you doing? What happened?
Well, I'll back up a minute.
Yeah.
When I started college, I have this. It was kind of like honor student of the month or something. It was my senior year, and it was a little plaque, and my parents sent it to me recently. They dug it up, and I'd forgotten all about it. And it said, "What do you want to do next year when you go to college?" And I said on this at that time that I wanted to be a golf course architect.
Hmm.
And I started off at University of Colorado in the equivalent of their landscape architecture program.
Okay.
And you matriculate through that, and then you come out with the landscape architecture degree, and then you figure out how to get into the golf business from there. That's an old story. Many people you've talked to here, every architect kind of has a similar story to that. How did you
Right.
get into
Right.
it?
Right.
That what I thought was going to be my path. I flunked out after a year. The studio time was way too much. We never got anywhere close to golf. I was like, I'm getting out of this. I'm going to the history department. So
Okay.
but
Interesting.
I
That's
always kind of
funny.
had that in
Yeah.
my mind, like that, what I wanted
Yeah.
to do. And then, I go through college and, getting jobs, started working in hotels and restaurants, and that built on. And I was, uh, an unlicensed sommelier for about 3 years and ran a big wine department at this fancy restaurant. Moved to Florida. Then that's how I got back into golf. That kind of rekindled my contact with golf and the ability to just work for online publications at first, and then uh, use those connections to kind of weasel my way onto golf courses and write online reviews. A
So
500
this
word
was like
online
sort
review.
of online stuff for Florida courses. I'm trying
Yeah,
to remember the
yeah,
ad your wife, the wanted ad your
yeah.
wife
That's right.
bought.
That's
Huh?
right. She
Yeah.
came home and a company that was starting these websites around the nation called travelgolf.com was the parent company, and then they had chicagogolf.com and floridagolf.com and orlandogolf.com. And so they were looking for people in Florida, and I'm like, I like golf. I write. I'd always been dabbling in writing. Also, in addition to being an architect, I might be a famous novelist. So it's kind of marrying two passions that I had. And
Sure.
I
Sure.
didn't get paid much, but I got to play a lot of golf in Florida, and it exposed me to other connections. But I spent almost 3 years driving around the state, often bringing my father-in-law along with me. Get him on the course. I would tell everyone he was my photographer. He never took a single photograph, but yeah, he was good company on those 2 and 3 hour drives around.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I got to see Florida golf up close, top to bottom, east to west, all the, mostly average courses that
Yeah. A lot of average
people,
courses in
our
Florida.
listeners
Yeah.
wouldn't really know about
No.
unless they'd
Yeah.
lived there, but a few good ones along the way as well. And you see different parts of the state. And um, one of the big stories I was really proud of that I did, it was early in when I finally got a connection to writing for magazines. This was in Travel and Leisure Golf, and I'd pitched this story for a while, and they finally went with it. I think I pitched it to Links too, but I wrote a story about these sand dunes in Florida in the central part of the state. There are these big sand ridges. Lake Wales Ridge is the popular one. There's another one up by Brooksville. There's another one over by DeLand. I mean, the whole state is sand, but these areas have serious elevation, 100, 200 feet in places. And there were just a few golf courses on it at the time. And I wrote about those. Worldwoods was
I was going to
one.
say Worldwoods is the one that comes to mind. Those dramatic cliffs and elevation changes. I've
Absolutely.
seen
It's
pictures
now
of it.
it's
Yeah.
now Cabot Citrus Farms.
Right. They changed. Right.
They
Right.
changed it, but
Yeah.
super deep sandy soils, really unlike anything else. Black Diamond Ranch
Yeah.
is nearby there. There's another Pete Dye course that was new at the time. Old courses like Mountain Lake is on the ridge, it's kind of south of Orlando, west of Orlando, and now of course Gil Hanse is building a new one down there called oh, High Point, not High Point, High. I wish I could remember. I'm blank on it now. It's going to open next year. Stream Song is down in that area.
Right. Right.
So there's a lot more golf exploiting these things. But this was back in 2006, 6 or 7 that I wrote this story. So I got something out of my living in Florida for those years, and a couple good stories and some connections.
Awesome. So and it sounds like at some point around now, you sort of step back a little bit from this stuff and you were focused on your kids and stuff because it sounds like there was a period that you stepped back and then before you kind of stepped back into the golf world in 2017, I think, when you had your podcast. Maybe talk to us about that, kind of what was going on during that time and kind of how
Yeah,
you
well,
went back and then back into it.
golf course architects will relate to this because in 2009, when the economic recession descended on the country, it wreaked havoc in a lot of industries, and golf
Sure.
golf courses construction was a major one. We went from building At that time it was already slowing down, but you're still, seeing like a couple dozen courses a year open of, from a high of, 5 years earlier, you're seeing, over 100 years courses a year open.
Right.
So architects suffered during that period. A lot of them, big companies were laying off associates. People were scrambling for work. There was just very little money in it. A lot of architects had to go try to find work overseas. Some just kind of quit and transitioned into other fields. It hit publishing really hard as well. The magazines, Travel and Leisure Golf was one casualty. That was one of my main contacts. I was doing things every issue for them. They went out of business. Some other regional magazines that I was working for went out of business. So I was almost unemployed. It was very difficult to find work in publishing at that time. So that's the same time our first child was born. So I kind of just used that break to raise kids for a few years. Dabbled as much as I could in writing. I actually was writing about for other non-golf publications, which was really miserable. And I don't know. I woke up. There was one time around 2016 or 2017 where I just thought, you know what, I have all this. I still love golf. I still read about it. I still want to play. I still want to be involved somehow.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'll just try a podcast. Like, that would be something that I can kind of do from home, and lean on some of my thoughts and experiences. So I researched that for a while. And at the time, the only other podcast that was really doing golf architecture was Andy Johnson's Fried Egg
Right.
podcast.
Fried egg. Right. Yeah.
That was right. He was just getting into it then. So I listened to all of his podcasts and kind of was a big fan of his just for kind of being a pioneer in that field and doing
Yeah.
it. So,
Absolutely.
but I thought that I could bring something a little different to it as well. And so I started that, I think, in 2017, and we've been doing it ever since. And that led me pretty much directly into my job now with Golf Digest.
Yeah, so talk about so how did the Golf Digest stuff come about? They knew you were in that
Yeah,
ecosystem, and so they needed some. Wait, I'm trying. Was Ron Whitten the one who was before you, or I'm trying to think of
that's right.
who?
That's right.
Yeah,
So like you, like I'm a lifelong Golf Digest reader. My dad had a subscription. Everybody I knew had a subscription, so
yeah,
I'd look forward to
absolutely.
every issue. And I would always like flip through. Well, where's the golf courses? What's the picture of the golf course? What's in it this month?
Right,
And
right.
every time I did that, there's Ron Whitten's byline. So from the time that really, that I was really, young, preteen, I would always see his byline. And as I got older and got into my podcast, I asked Ron to come on. I was just a huge fan of his. I respected and admired like everything that he had done for the business of architecture and architecture publishing and writing. His great work that he wrote with Jeff Cornish. We started the first volume was called The Golf Course, and then they amended it in the early '90s. It's called The Architects of Golf. And if anybody has an interest in golf course architecture and you don't have this, then you just have missed out on like one of the fundamental research texts. They spent years and years and years researching this and tracking down architects and researching every golf course every architect has ever built.
Wow,
And,
wow.
and think about doing that in the 70s and 80s before the
Yeah, a
internet.
lot harder, right?
Yeah, cold calling relatives and going to libraries and asking librarians to research and going through club archive. I mean, I don't know how he had the time to do it, and yet he did it, and that's kind of been the foundation of which every golf writer who writes about golf courses at least stands on Ron's work and his shoulders. So I was just such a huge fan of his. He came on the podcast. We had a great conversation. Never really talked to him again after that for at least a year. Didn't know if he had a good time. He seemed kind of grumpy. He can be a grumpy guy. He's a hard guy to please. So I figured he didn't like it. He had a bad experience, and we'd never talk again. But I don't know. I got a call at some point, a year later, a year and a half later, and he said, "Hey, Derek, it's Ron." I said, "Oh, hey, Ron. Yeah, what's happening?" He goes, "Well, I'm." Long and short of it was, he said he was thinking about like winding his career down, and they're looking for somebody to replace him. Would I be interested in
Wow.
applying for it?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, no, I mean, well, obviously, I was like dumbfounded. And I remember I called my wife right after I hung up with Ron. I said, "Hey, babe, I, I just got the call I've been waiting my whole life for."
Right.
Yeah.
How
Oh,
awesome.
yeah. So I mean, I did have to interview for it. I had to go up and meet everybody at Golf Digest, and I don't know who else they looked at, but they offered me the job, and I worked with Ron for about a year. That was during the first year of COVID. COVID hit, 3 months after I started. So that kind of accelerated Ron's departure because they were offering our parent company was offering buyouts, so he took one, and he had a nice place to go to. He's now probably as happy as he's ever been, I would imagine. He's designing golf courses. He's on the other side of it now. He's doing
Wow.
renovations. He works with an architect named Todd Clark out of Kansas City.
Cool.
They're busy. They've got some really cool stuff going on. So he's where he should be, and I like to think that I'm where I should be now.
Absolutely. So, before we get into architecture generally, I just want to talk a little bit about the Golf Digest Top 100. So, as you alluded to, and starting with my dad, who I think was subscribed in fall of 1970, and
Nice.
it kind of kills me. My wife made me throw out all of these, years and years of Golf Digest magazines, 50 plus years was accumulating. I did save a few of them, but because there's a lot of gems back then, great writers, great magazine.
Well,
Anyways,
the writers who came through Golf Digest are, I mean,
amazing,
it's
right?
it's the Hall of Fame of golf
Totally.
writing.
I
Yeah.
mean, everyone justifiably talks about SI back in the day and justifiably so. But, some of those guys wrote for, I mean, Dan Jenkins
There's
would
a
do a
lot of
piece of,
crossover.
right. And I mean,
Yeah.
just some brilliant
Dan
stuff. And,
Jenkins, Peter Dobereiner, Charles
right,
Price.
right.
I mean, these are guys that I still read to this day.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I kind of look backwards with much fondness on all of those days and those issues. But one of the, things that's been a centerpiece, of course, is the biannual rankings, the top 100, which I know is a big part of what you do. I would always excitedly get at the issue and flip open and see, of course, this is pre-internet days, back when you actually had to wait for the physical magazine to come to your door, as opposed to these days where it seems like everything I've already read before I get the magazine online. But anyways, the top 100 was and still is a big deal, and obviously it's expanded. You have the top 200 now, the by state rankings and everything, but. Maybe just talk for our readers what that process is like. I know it's very data driven. I know you've got a bunch of panelists and how they score, but and you look at past data and weight more recent data more heavily. But maybe just talk through kind of what the process is like that it goes through and kind of what your role in it is.
Mhm. So back in 1985 was Ron and Jerry Tardy were part of a big movement to modify the way that Golf Digest rankings had been up to that point. It started in 1966 or
Right.
66
Yeah, I think
or
I
67 with the
thought it was
200
66, but yeah, yeah.
America's 200 toughest golf courses. And
Toughest, right? That's what it used to be called.
toughest, and
Not greatest.
they went mostly off of the USGA course rating, which back then was not conducted the way it is now. It was a little more primitive. There was a much smaller range of numbers. So if you look at that list now, you'll see the course ratings on most of those. I think the highest is like maybe 74, 73.5 was the highest course rating. Of course, now that you have some at 79 or 80 at certain golf courses. So it was much lesser bandwidth. So then on top of that, they were consulting with regional experts, head pros, great amateur players of, so which of these courses do you consider like the most challenging and the toughest? And at that time, it kind of also meant the best. So they would compile a list, a non-scientific list based on course rating and some feedback from regional, experts. They modified that the next 2 years to it was another version of the 200 kind of toughest courses or most challenging. I forget what the wording was. And then 2 years after that, they started to do America's best courses, the greatest courses. But it was still done by committee. They would get all of this data and these submissions from around the country, from each region, from these experts, and we did have panelists, but they weren't judging the courses the way they do now. And then the committee, which would be like Joseph Dye, Sam Snead, these
Yeah,
big
yeah.
people from the industry. They would sit around and these are stories. You should have Jerry Tardy on sometime
Oh, I
and
would
hear
love to
all
get
these
Jerry
stories.
on, I'm sure. Yeah.
And they were bartered. And there was some story that Jerry tells where for a while Augusta National was not even in the top 10 because Sam Snead didn't like it, and he would like
Really?
always argue against it. He would lobby against Augusta National being in the
Wow.
first 10. Then they would break it down by tiers. So Augusta wasn't even in the top 10. So that was a very, they had their thumb on the scale, and and it was very political from my understanding. But then in 1985 they developed the category scoring system. Every category scored on a 1 through 10 scale. You add up the points, and then that the rankings are now numerical and based on some sort of like actual categorical data. And we've been doing it that way ever since. We rely on volume, which is different than Golf Magazine, which has a very small panel of curated people who are a lot of them are in the industry in some way. A lot of them are architects. A lot of them are developers. So they have a different kind of viewpoint on it. I think their viewpoint is a little more narrow. They're less tolerant of. Oh, they don't have a wide variety of golf courses. They're very based. They tend to like historical golf courses, old golf courses, classical architecture, established architects. Whereas Golf Digest, we get as much data as we can, as many ballots as possible, as many voices as possible, and then see where things shake out. And we also, the other thing that really separates us from almost everybody else that I know is our rankings go back 10 years. So we take
Right.
10 years worth of data, and every 2 years, the oldest 2 years fall off. So you're really looking at a 10-year period of a golf course, whereas golf in Golf Week, I think they kind of start from scratch every 2 years. They send out new ballots, so everybody, you could change your vote. You could have one golf course ranked 37th one year, and then it comes back the next year and you could have it fifth. I'm don't hold me to that, Rand Moore said, I'm sorry, but it's something like that. Whereas we can't do that. We're like tethered to the data. So for a golf course to move up, you have to have like basically everybody thinks who plays that golf course submits a new rating that is monumentally higher than all the numbers that exist for a golf course to move up in the rankings. So there's a little bit slower movement up and down in our rankings than elsewhere, because it's based on all of this data and volume that we have.
So how much, like how big is the panel, or maybe another way to ask is like, how many submissions do you typically get? I'm sure it varies from course to course, but like when you're saying it's a lot of data, what's an average number of, I don't know, ballots is the right term, but
So
score sheets you would get
yeah,
on a given
yeah.
course?
So for a course to be eligible to show up in our 100 greatest or second 100 greatest, we publish up to 200. They have to have a minimum of 50
I
evaluations
see.
submitted
Okay.
over the previous 10 years. Most of the courses in our top 200, with the exception of some that are really really hard to get to or are new, have 150 to 250 evaluations. So
Wow.
for a golf course to be ranked in the top 200 for us, it's appealing to a lot of people. You're
Right.
getting a consensus on that. There are some courses that a lot of people think it's excellent, and a lot of people scratch their head at it. So those kind of tend to like average out, maybe just outside the top 200. But you're seeing kind of almost like a form of unanimity for any golf course that ranks in our top 200.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. I mean, I can only imagine what your inbox must be like when these come out every 2 years. You get a lot of people like, what the heck happened? How could we not be higher type input from folks.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that you are the same way in your travels when you talk to people from other clubs. Almost everybody thinks that their golf course is better than it is.
Yeah, yeah,
They
absolutely.
love their golf course. They think that it should be ranked higher. Why are we ranked eighth in this state? We're better than this. We're better than this. We're better than this. I have that conversation all the time. So everybody just starts off, unless you're in the top 20, and you kind of understand like why a golf course is ahead of you, you think your golf course is ranked too low. But it is unpleasant for clubs, and I know I'm sympathetic to this when they start sliding backwards, or they go out of their way to do things like a renovation, or um, hire a new superintendent who's really improved the quality of their turf. It's noticeable to all their members and their guests, and yet then the new rankings come out and they've dropped 12 spots, and they're like, "What happened? What are we doing wrong?" Like, and then a lot of times they get mad at Golf Digest,
I'm
and
sure.
they sometimes they kind of cut off access to us. That doesn't happen too much, and most of the people that we deal with are professionals. We're dealing with general managers, staff, and they understand it, the business. they're in the hospitality business, so they don't want to cut people off. But yeah, committees and and members can get very upset about not seeing, and owners too, definitely can get very upset about not seeing that number in front of the name of their course reflective of how they feel or the investment that they've put in. But you know, excuse me, I've mentioned Jerry Tardy a few times. He said there's 20 top 10 courses in the United States, and there are 300 top 100 courses.
Right, right,
There's only so many spots available.
right, right. No,
And
that
and
that's
and and for every club that's ranked, that just dropped out of the 100 top 100, and they're ranked 104th now. I promise you, there are 1,000 clubs right behind them
oh,
that would
would
be dying for that 104th spot.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
it's a bit of a thankless job that we do. I'm like everybody else. When I see the results, I scratch my head about a number of courses in them. Invariably, it's some being too high, some being too low, and I just have to live with it. The rankings don't reflect my choices. I manage it. I try to make sure that all of our panelists understand the categories that we're asking them to evaluate, that they're being judicious, that they're not being swayed by outside influences, that they're being impartial, that they're not walking into some club and getting blown away by the opulence or
Right, right,
the wealth or the setting, or
right.
that they're really looking at the golf hole. So I try to that's how I try to manage it, is making sure that they're always just focused on the golf course. And it's a work in progress, and it's hard to change the way people have viewed golf courses for 40 years. You can't just come in and say, "Oh, you're you're looking at shot options in a different way than we really intend this category to mean." They've been doing it for so long. They
Right.
used to go to golf courses in the 1970s and 80s and think that was the best kind of golf that there is. If that's your impression, if that's how you grew up, you're exposed to the game, that evolution away from that thinking. I'm not even saying they should, but in our categories, the way we score courses, we have evolved away from what was valued in the 70s and 80s and 90s to what's kind of being built and praised, and where the kind of the golfer mentality and desires are right now. That has evolved. So we want our panelists to at least be cognizant of that and understand like what the categories are asking us to look at.
Yeah, well, that's actually a perfect transition to sort of what I wanted to talk to you about, which is kind of where golf architecture or how it's evolved over the last 30 years. And let me just throw a few things on the table and we can get into this. So I'm a little older than you, but when I was sort of growing up, it was like I grew up on the CBS Golf Classic, growing up in West Hartford, Connecticut. So we didn't have, a 12-month season like I have out here in LA, and looking at Firestone and, all of those long par fours, the trees, even after the Dutch elm disease, replacing the trees and, those long par fours. And that was kind of, and of course they had the World Series of Golf there, and or Butler National's another one at the Western Open. Oak Tree is another one that comes to mind. These were sort of what are viewed as the ultimate championship test. Long, lush golf courses, length being really important. And that was what, at least growing when I was growing up, was looked at as sort of that's like, the ultimate in golf tests, great golf courses. Looking today, we're now 30, 40 years down the path. It seems so different. There seems to be a much greater appreciation of firm, fast conditions, more strategy, things other than just pure length being viewed as components of greatness. And kind of along the way, we've had this sort of renewed appreciation, I think it's fair to say, of the golden age architects. I'm out here, obviously, so I'm in the middle of George Thomas's three great courses in LA, or Mackenzie, where, we're going up to Walker Cup at Cypress. And I just was at the Valley Club a week or two ago, which is our one Mackenzie gem in Southern California. Just a much more appreciation of those kind of courses. It seems just like when I sort of step back and just think about where we are now, whereas, where I was, when I was in my early 20s, 40 years ago, it just seems like a sea change in terms of how people view golf architecture, what's viewed as great golf architecture. So throwing that all on the table for you, what do you think has sort of caused this, what I think is a pretty massive change in viewpoint on stuff like this?
I mean, it's a complicated topic that has several different answers. One of them is kind of the slow prying away of the grip of professional golf from golf in general. When you grew up, and even when I grew up, and before, the introduction that most people had to golf was often either they drove past it, their parents played it, or they saw it on television. And what were they seeing on television? They were seeing these beautiful stars of sports, young Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, Tom Watson coming after that, the funny Lee Trevino. These are the guys that they see on TV, and that they think of golf that way. And what kind of golf courses are they playing? What are they seeing on TV? They're seeing a very one-dimensional style of golf course because there wasn't a lot of golf diversity, and they weren't playing an average. They weren't playing the Houston Open on a very good golf course. They were played Augusta and they played Riviera, I suppose, during the 70s and 80s, and maybe one or two others, Westchester. But the public looked at golf through the lens of professional players and professional golf, and they saw the shots that they were hitting, and they saw the balls that they were playing, and the clubs they were using, and the bags that they put their clubs in, and everything was very kind of top down in golf courses. And as you get into the 90s and the late 90s and the early 2000s, and media has a lot to do with this. The internet has a lot to do with this. The availability of information and other resources has a lot to do with prying the view of golf almost singularly through the lens of the professional game away, and pulling back and being able to see it through access to equipment, to new golf courses, to different looks and magazines of different golf courses, to a wider diversity of instruction. Just there's more voices, and in golf architecture, that meant exposing people to different landscapes, showing them different looks. Not they didn't have to get their golf course fixed through television. There were many more resources to get it. This coincides with the move to that developers began to see how much a difference good land meant. The land driving the development of golf rather than commerce driving the development of golf. Before that, golf development was tied up in housing and real estate. It was tied up in luxury country clubs. It was tied into upscale daily fee courses that there was like a turnstile to get people through, and municipal golf as always. And then with Mike Kaiser and Dick Youngscap and then the people that looked at the success of those courses, built in really faraway places that were inaccessible. Nobody would ever come up with that business model to build a golf course where Bandon Dunes was, despite the ocean. How are people going to get there? Nobody's going to come play this. It's cold and windy and rainy most of the time, and people are going to spend 7 hours traveling here to play this golf course. There was no business model where that works. Same with Sandhills, and yet it did work because they put the emphasis on the right things. They put the emphasis on the golf course, on playability, on walking, on being in an environment that was stimulating, where there were no houses. Mike Kaiser didn't put the clubhouse on the edge of the ocean. He put it way far back so the golf courses, the golf holes could be on the ocean. I mean, these were groundbreaking concepts. And these architects that they found to execute this plan were the best. They understood this style of golf. They weren't locked into the old PGA Tour style of let's make it hard, let's make it challenging, let's fortify the front of greens, let's build water hazards. They were into let's emulate the links as much as possible. Let's emphasize the ground game. Let's give players width because it's really windy here. The ball's going to be going everywhere. Let's make the holes connect so that they can walk this golf course in 4 hours or less. These were radical ideas. And when developers see that, then they say, well, if they can do it there, I can grab this piece of land, 2.5 hours outside of Denver and build Ballyneal. That's like Sandhills.
Yeah,
I can build a golf course on the coast of New Zealand on these cliffs.
Right,
People will come.
right,
If it's good, people will come.
Yeah.
So that changes. But at that time, Larry, you might remember, from in the early 2000s, you saw pictures of Bandon Dunes, but you had to be an insider to really know who Bill Cooley or Tom Doak or Gil Hanse were.
That's right.
They were the outsiders. And at that time, it was kind of a really beautiful time in golf architecture, even better than now, I think, because you did have this movement happening, this revolution of outsiders building these golf courses that nobody ever seen, but all of a sudden we all wanted to play, whether we realized it or not, or whether we thought we could get there or not. We wanted to go play that golf course that we saw because it looked exotic and wild, and it's on the ocean or it's in the dunes. And then at the same time, though, you still have Jack Nicklaus is doing his company's doing his best work. He kind of got away from his muscular make it hard face.
Right,
They're
right.
shaping their courses differently. They're using short grass around the greens with roll offs, so they're emphasizing playability and short game. Tom Fazio is doing some of his best work, still building these really high budget but high concept, beautiful courses. You have the Jones brothers who are still in it. You have Mike Strands, kind of at the tail end of
Yes,
his career, but he's
right.
already laid down a legacy au revoir of courses that are unlike anything else. Jim Eng is hitting his stride, doing something completely different that nobody else is doing. Pete Dye still. You have the most diverse collection of golf course architecture that's ever existed before, and all these courses are really good. And it kind of saddens me a little bit. What's happened is a lot of that has kind of petered out, that diversity, and now these outsiders, core the Sand Hills, Bandon Dunes, Stream Song, Sand Valley model has kind of just taken over. It's at the center of golf course architecture. It used to be on the extreme. It used to be radical. It used to be countercultural in a way, and now it's at the center, and everybody wants some of that. And the good news is developers are finding more land than ever to build golf courses that are all of these things we just talked about, but it's at the exclusion of originality. It's at the exclusion of actual architecture. It's at the exclusion of new ideas. The land is so good, you have to make your golf course look like sand hills. You have to make your bunkers look ragged and shoot out, blown out by the wind. You have to build width. So everything that has a kind of common look and common DNA right now, and it's the downside of this move toward better land. Now the land is like so good, it's kind of like overtaken the creative side. And you can say, I know I'm rambling here. I'm sorry, but
No, no, this is
you can
great. Go ahead.
look at any individual golf course. You can look at any course at Stream Song, any course at Sand Valley. You can look at like Old Barnwell, all these courses that are and yes, there are definitely differences. Actually, Old Barnwell's a poor example because that one really is different. But you can look at these golf courses and say, yeah, there are differences between them. But if you pull back and just look at the trend of architecture and how it's evolved, they're really all kind of one piece. They level out to be a lot of the sameness. And then on the other hand, when you're talking about renovations and restorations, I listened
Yeah,
to your conversation with Kyle Phillips.
yeah,
Um, if that's kind of almost the same too, and I get it. Like if you're uncovering lost architecture that had been buried under decades of renovation, and you're peeling it back and you're getting to that great George Thomas architecture, you're getting to that Alistair McKenzie stuff, you're getting to that A.W. Tillinghast stuff, and reviving what was there. Yes, I think you should absolutely do that. But when architects have a chance to build a new golf course that's not in some prairie, some sand dune setting, they invariably are going back to old architecture. They're saying, I'm doing it in the Seth Rayner style. I'm doing it in the old Donald. These bunkers are Donald Ross. This is how they did it in the Heathland courses. And again, it's just kind of going where the safe mentality is in architecture without really exploring what this diverse range of courses that we had in the early 2000s that I said a minute ago. We've lost that, and everybody's just kind of like trying to tap into this same mode because it's successful, and that's kind of where the zeitgeist is right now. But we've lost a little bit of direction right now. Something's going to happen. Uh, there's going to be a breakout. There always is, and it's going to kind of shake things up. I would say that with some confidence, not a great amount of confidence. I hope that happens, but things are going too well in golf right now for things to change too much.
very interesting.
Developers know what their members want right now, so they're going to keep getting it for a while.
Do you see, as this is it's a very interesting point. I mean, to me, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense. Do you see any courses that are breaking out of any newer courses that are breaking out of this mold at all? I mean, I have not played Ladera. In fact, I'm sort of um, regretful. Yeah, I'm a course rater, but not a course rater like you. I do SCGA like slope course rating, not evaluating courses. And I
Right.
missed the chance to go out to the desert to do that. I was out of town because they had to do the rating for it. I mean, I know that's not on great land, although I'm told by the people who went out there it was just so creative. But I mean, I don't know if that's an example. But I mean, do you see any courses coming up now that you see as, maybe the first wave of going someplace different than these, and breaking into a little bit of a new form at all?
Well, first on Ladera, it's a remarkable piece of engineering. I mean, it was just a lemon grove with some mango trees or whatever they
Yeah,
have
so not
on
great
a, on a
land,
really
right?
on a flat piece of ground. It was
Right.
dead flat. So it was what Gil Hans and Jim did was staggering to transform that piece of land into what it is. It's got so much movement. It's got these beautiful arroyos that cut through it and make it look like it was natural and it was there. And I have nothing but praise for Ladera. It's wonderful and their achievement is as high as I think it can get in golf course engineering. But again, they tried to make it look like a golf course that already existed
Mm,
on the land, and it's very natural and it plays great. But it wasn't conceptually from a strategic or aesthetic point of view, it wasn't breaking new ground.
got it.
Um, I don't know. I don't see the next Pete Dye coming along right now. I will say I mentioned Old Barnwell a minute ago.
Yeah,
That stands out as being a very unique creation. It's tapping into the past, which I mentioned. I kind of think we need to get past that, but in a way that I hadn't seen before. They're drawing references not just from the 1920s, but like really early American architecture with some deep kind of trenches, some raised berms, so playing with scale, great use of grasses for texture. There's something and really wild greens that are so fun. There's something there that's really worthy of deeper study. I feel like Brian Schneider and Blake Conant were kind of hitting on something, maybe the next step of where we are, where it can go. But it's not a radical shift. I don't know where the next shift is going to come from. There's no taste right now for Jim Eng's kind of architecture that's obviously manufactured and created from the brain and not from the land. I don't think that we've gotten to the point where there's high demand for it yet, but somebody would have to get a developer to let them do something like that. And if they could get over that hurdle, then I think that people would be very happy to get to a point where they can exercise their own vision rather than having to tailor their architecture or their design to the land.
yeah, that makes sense. In terms of you mentioned Mike Kaiser, and I completely agree. I mean, who would have thought people were going to schlep to the southwestern coast of Oregon? It's
Yeah.
such to go play, and you mentioned Sand Hills and Corin Crenshaw's masterpiece there. Um, I'm just sort of thinking about kind of what are kind of the important people or important events that have led to this transformation that you described so well. Tom Doak seems like someone we should mention as well. I think you mentioned him in passing. Um, what did you think when you first saw the Confidential Guide to Golf Courses, his, famous publication, which, slayed a few sacred cows, as Tom is wont to do. I'm sitting here. I've got the 96 version, but not certainly not the original one. And I've had his updated one. But I'm just curious, when you first came across that, what was your reaction to it?
Oh, it's titillating. I mean, it's titillating reading. But the thing that what I've always thought about Tom Doak and probably others too, but it's down the list of what the topics of conversation are when you bring up his name is he's a fantastic writer. He's one of the most con- keenest, acute writers. There's not a word out of place. He doesn't write flowery. It's not ornate, but he knows how to cut to the bone and say exactly what he's going to say. I've always taken a lot of inspiration from reading those reviews, thinking, how can you be more concise? I tend to be in my writing tend to, it's big, and then I have to kind of whittle it down, and it still comes off a little dreamy. And just the way that he articulates his points almost make them inarguable. I mean, it's a very
Right,
great skill
right.
that he has. Yeah, and you read, like, one of my favorite reviews was he gave a 0 to a golf course here in Atlanta up at the Golf Club of Georgia, and it really was a terrible hole. It's like a par five that jumps over these wetlands twice. And you got to hit like a 5-iron to a fairway, and then you got to bust a 3-wood to the next island fairway, and then you got to, there are trees. Anyway, he just said it was like one of the most tortured holes that he'd ever seen. And when I played that, I had played that hole, and then I read that, and I was like, damn, that's exactly what that is. So, I mean, he's mellowed out in
A
as
little
he's
bit, yeah.
gotten older.
Yeah.
But that just as a piece of writing, the Confidential Guide from the 1996 Confidential Guide is just, it's a great read.
It really is. I mean, one other thing which you sort of touched on a little bit is how much more accessible all this knowledge seems to be. The internet obviously is a big part of that. You mentioned Andy Johnson, and the great stuff they do at Fried Egg, Garrett, the rest of them, and I would, add my not neighbor, nearby neighbor, Jeff Shackelford, with what he does with the Quadrilateral newsletter. That's also kind of been a big change, right? I mean, when you and I'll grab another book here. I used to sort of live for these kind of books and stuff
Oh, yeah.
like that. The golf. This is, Bill Davis and Golf Digest book for
I
the
wish we
100
still
great
had the
scores.
budget to put those on, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure how well they'd sell anymore.
well, I know, but I'm like you. I mean, God, I have David Cannon's book. I have so many books over there, these huge coffee
Yeah,
table books with beautiful photos. I'm a sucker for that. I love it.
I'm the same.
But now there's just so much on the internet and there's so much availability. I mean, you've got to find people seem a lot more knowledgeable about architecture in golf. That's a big change, right?
It is. It's a game changer in a way. I would talk to Ron and Brad Klein, and they were working through the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and they would say, like, no matter what they did or how they framed their product, they only felt that they were reaching 5 to 3% of the golf population. Just architecture was just a very niche side hustle in the whole publishing world. And the people that were into it were really into it, but there was a limited audience, and they were never able, they felt, to be able to break through. I give Andy Johnson, like, all the credit in the world. He took, more than anybody else, he was able to take his product and his voice and make it matter to more people than it ever has before. And it was just the right timing. There was a generation of people that were really interested in golf, and they were interested in golf beyond just PGA Tour stuff. Kind of goes back to what I was saying before.
Right,
There's
right,
a
exactly.
slow unraveling of the dominant culture of PGA Tour golf over all of golf. So these younger guys are on the internet. They're starting to listen to podcasts. They're hungry for information. And these people went from, like, zero knowledge of architecture through Andy and hopefully through my podcast, Feed the Ball, a little bit,
Absolutely. Yeah.
to being a little bit more interested in it. And that has just kind of blown the doors off of it now. And people notice that, developers have cashed in, architects have cashed into a way. There's just, 10 times more people who are willing to jump on a plane and fly somewhere to play golf, bring their camera, start an Instagram account, broadcast where they've been. You've had people, like, there's some Golf Digest panelists who've turned into pretty good photographers and really cashed in on their access to become pretty prominent. But now everybody, you can scroll through Instagram and if your feed's like mine, it's 90% golf.
Absolutely.
And it's just, everybody's been everywhere. Everybody's been to these great courses. There's just a procession of beautiful photography, beautiful, great access, opinions, and then again, that kind of comes at the cost of singular voices who you can trust. You can definitely still trust the Fried Egg. But everybody else, it's kind of like, they're chasing the red dot on the floor. Wherever the red dot goes,
Right,
everybody
right.
goes.
That's a good description,
This
right?
is the hot new course, or everybody said, like, this week, what was the lead up to the Walker Cup at Cypress Point? every golf account had nothing but the Cypress Point material. It used to be, it sounds like I'm pining for the old days, and I'm not, but it used to be in the lead up to a major championship, for instance. You'd go to you'd have Golf Digest, Golf Magazine, maybe Golf Week, a couple other, the Golf Channel when they were around, and now it's just like there are 100 different places where you can get basically the exact same story. When a new course opens, it's like 100 different accounts that are all there reporting on the same opening. They're all reporting on the same architect. It's just it's created kind of almost, it's broadened it, but it's also become a monoculture at the same time.
Yeah.
So
But
and
there's not the gatekeepers and stuff. That is true.
yeah, and overall, look, Larry, that's good overall, right? It's good. There are too many sacred cows in golf.
Yeah.
There are a lot more people who have access to it. Enthusiasm is a good thing, but just from a media perspective, it hasn't elevated the conversation about golf. It has to a degree. It's broadened it, but it hasn't necessarily elevated it overall. It's kind of made a lot of people just have strong opinions, but their phones are there. They do their talking with their phones and their
Yeah,
peers.
that is true. Although, the quality ones, and I would put, what Andy and Garrett did for Cypress, where they walked through all 18 holes and interspersed, it was beautifully produced and interspersed it with all sorts of old photos and listening to Garrett. And I've only had the, great fortune to play it once. And although I remember it like I've played it 100 times, it was so memorable. But the way Garrett described, the different nuances that, I certainly hadn't appreciated having playing it once. It was great. Your piece that I just went through yesterday, which was on the 16th hole, but really much more than that. You talked about the course was fantastic. So there's a lot out there, but the quality stuff is, and certainly put your stuff and their stuff at the top of that list is great. But you're right. Every time we go to one of these things, I can only imagine the amount of Bethpage stuff I'm going to get, coming up now once we get past the Walker Cup for the Ryder Cup. And
Yeah, no, that's
but
next. Trust me, it's all queued up and ready to come. It's funny, these clubs, they host media days, either sometimes a year ahead of time, sometimes 6 months ahead of time. And in the old days, I'm assuming that it used to be 90% newspaper guys. Back when every newspaper had their golf reporter, they would all
right.
go to the media day. Maybe they get a preview of the course. Maybe they're just there to like bullshit and drink, but that's who it was. Nowadays, when they have these media days, it's 50 guys with a drone and
I'm
cameras.
sure.
I mean, it's all the same guy. They're all doing taking the exact same footage, shooting the exact same shots, talking about the exact same things. Um, and I think back in the newspaper days, you would get like people would be searching for like different angles and different stories and different personnel. Or
Yes.
during the major championship week, they're looking for like the players, and we're going to get that with the Walker Cup, and I'm sure like people are doing player profiles and looking at human interest angles and things like that. But that used to be the whole content of a media day and the lead up to a tournament, and now it's all about photography and vision.
Yeah, for sure. Although Cyprus is a pretty enticing one for that, for sure. It's
No
so
doubt.
gorgeous. Let me sort of get you out of here on one other topic, which I know is not a small one, but that I wanted to get your thoughts on. One of my favorite topics is sort of the role of technology in the game, the distance explosion, fueled by, what I will call unregulated technology, over the last 30 years. We could have a long conversation about why that's happened. I personally think, the Ping lawsuit and the USGA's reaction to it, had a lot to do with it. But whatever, we are where we are. But, we see ourselves today. And you see these, sustainability issues. I mean, there's so many new aspects here, right? Sustainability issues. I mean, me being particularly in the western part of the United States, that's a big issue. Having to ever build ever longer courses. I'm here with at Riv is I mean, there's one of my favorite courses in the world. But I mean, I go over there, I think the 12th hole has got to be a full wedge from where I play it to the back tee, where it's all the way. It's like 100-yard walk behind 11 to go all the way back there, once a year.
Mhm.
What's that expression? Building the church for Easter Sunday. I mean, it's and the other aspect to me, and I get great pleasure when I see these guys occasionally, whether it's Rory at the Scottish Open, someone puts a persimmon wood in their hand and an old ball, and you see how different it is. And I personally think it kind of flattens the skill level at the elite game, and I just wonder why we don't bifurcate. I mean, I'm a Yankees fan. I mean, if Aaron Judge had a metal bat, we'd have fatalities at third base. So I just, bifurcation's not a dirty word for me. But from your standpoint and looking at architecture, and you mentioned Kyle, we talked a little bit about this when he's renovating, and all these perfectly situated bunkers aren't really perfectly situated anymore to get the same strategic value and having to deal with that. What's your kind of take on the impact of technology and kind of where we're going with it, or where maybe we should be going with it in terms of, preserving, these great cathedrals, and in the face of this, distance explosion, which yes, they're better athletes, and I have no problem with that, but is in part caused by the tremendous change in the technology.
Well, yeah, that's inarguable that the technology has, turned a handful of people in the world into superheroes with golf clubs in their hands. But I just come back to, like, let's not take our eye off the ball. Let's let's let the PGA Tour be the PGA Tour, and let's let the rest of us play the games that we play, and not chase something that is impractical, or we're never going to be able to reckon with, the half a percent of elite players. Some golf courses want to host tournaments where these guys are going to come through. Most golf courses don't. So I don't think it's an issue. I don't think it should change architecture at all. Some architects are charged with modifying courses that are chasing these tournaments,
Right.
and you have to build back tees for that if you have the room. Um, it can or can't add to sustainability. The argument would be like you have to run irrigation and drainage back there.
Right.
But if you're one of these clubs that is chasing this, you have the money. I mean, that's not even an issue. You're not even, I mean, you're spending so much money on everything else. You're ripping up your greens and putting in hydronics and,
Right.
precision air, like rebuilding bunkers with the latest bunker technology liners. So, like, so the sustainability and cost, it shouldn't be an issue because golf courses shouldn't be worrying about how far the ball is going. You play enough golf with average players. I almost never, I play I when I travel, I almost always play with the head professional or the director of golf or the club champion or an assistant pro. I never see the golf course being overpowered. Every once in a while,
No,
you'll play
no,
with
not by
an
those. Right.
assistant pro like who can hit 310. But whatever, good for him. Even these guys that are shooting par or under par, they're hitting it 280. They're not hitting it 320 like the
Right.
professionals or the
Right.
young amateurs are. So I would say don't worry about it. If you really want to improve the golf product that you see on television at the professional level, I'm with you. I think bifurcation is an obvious answer. Make the pros play with a tournament ball that doesn't fly as far. It will help for the golf courses that they play. It will help those courses not become obsolete because there are very few courses that can handle 330-yard drives and still have some relevance to scoring.
Right.
And then just let everybody else keep playing what they're playing right now. It doesn't have to be a rollback ball for recreational golfers is a horrible idea. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
there's no reason for it. You
Yeah.
can come. I've seen all kinds of economic and marketing rationale why that would be detrimental. No, you can still sell the tournament ball in the pro shop, and then the white belts who want to see what they can do, they're still going to go buy it and try to hit it. But you're not making everybody like lose
Right.
10 yards or whatever it turns out for different players. So,
Yeah.
but my main thing is don't worry about it. I don't think golf courses are under threat of being destroyed by guys who are all driving at 310. That's a very, very small percentage of people who hit it that far. Getting into like how the ball spins or the dispersion patterns, I'm a little more sympathetic to that, but you can have a wide dispersion pattern from the 6,200 yard tees too. That doesn't,
Oh, for sure.
it's not just a length, you can hit it 30 yards offline, 40 yards, 50 yards offline from any set of tees. So you don't have to create more room or sustainability issues to control that. I just had Jerry Pate on my podcast, and
Oh,
he
okay.
was talking about the equipment that they used back in the, when he ran
Yeah.
a TPC Sawgrass, and he was
Yeah.
talking about like the Balata balls that everybody used. And I remember this, you're older than me, but not that much. I grew up playing like steel shafts, persimmon.
Absolutely.
In
Yeah.
fact, actually, I didn't even play persimmon because that was more expensive. But whatever
Yeah,
kind
you
of
were
like
laminated like me in the
laminated
beginning, right?
driver, yeah. But still, like when you get one of those Balata balls, like I've never hit balls as far offline as I did back
Oh,
then.
I mean, I remember duck hooking with those things. I mean, you can't duck hook these drivers the way you could the old ones.
No, the balls do not side spin nearly as much as in the old days. So when you say like the technology is, now I'm not saying you're saying this, but if the argument is the dispersion pattern is so much greater now, yes and no. I mean, a little bit, but man, I saw a lot of houses and a lot of cars get dinged when I was growing up playing golf, more so than I do
100%.
now.
100%. Absolutely.
Let me
Well,
ask you
listen,
something. Let
yeah,
me ask
absolutely. Please. Oh,
before
go,
we
go
go.
ahead. Yeah,
So
fire
so
away.
so you're at Brentwood, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you see our rankings and you don't see Brentwood ranked
Yeah.
high, how do you think Brentwood is positioned in the state rankings for California?
Oh, what a great. So I don't even know where it is. I know it's not high. I'd have to, I don't even look for that. So
I know I should have been prepared and looked it up before.
so but that's a really great question. Well, what do I think? Doesn't bother me in the least. I
Yeah.
mean, I think Todd Eckenrode, who I'm sure you're familiar with, did a great job when he came and renovated it. I don't know if you've played it at all. You
Todd,
have a
Todd
standing.
Todd drove me around at one time, so I didn't play it,
Okay.
but he gave me a tour.
Okay. Well, you absolutely have a standing
And by
invitation
the
next
way,
time you're in
I
LA.
don't know how you got Todd on your podcast. I've been trying for 4 years to get him to come on
Well,
Feed the
I
Ball.
think I had a little edge since he had done the work for Brentwood, but anyways, so you certainly have a standing invitation. You're out here to play, but I think he did a great job. It's a members course. I mean, I probably have 15 partners from Latham who belong to LACC, and it's a treat to go out there. I have a couple more who are at Riv. That's, right, probably two par fives away from my house. I mean, that's a treat. I love those. We're not those. We're not Bel Air. Frankly, the job that Kyle did at Hillcrest, which I thought was phenomenal because I thought it was, with all due respect, a crapola course before. And
Yep.
it's amazing to me what he did there, not just, the use of the land, the full driving range, the par three course. So we're behind that. And, he and I've talked to and I've seen, I just talked to the GM at Wilshire. I'm sure that's going to be spectacular. So if I listed all those, I think I've just gone through all the West Side courses. We'll be six on that list of six, and that's where I would put us. So it doesn't. So does it bother me? No, I think. I mean, I'd have to go through the list and study it and see exactly how many people were behind. But no, I mean, we're 6 out of 6 in LA once Kyle's finished with Wilshire, and I think that's right.
That's good company too. I thought Brentwood was remarkable. It looked fantastic, and I'd never hear people talk about it really. Maybe they do, obviously more in Los Angeles, but then when I
Well, it
hear,
definitely, I did sort of, it's funny because, and I don't know if it was Golf Digest, it may have been when the US Open came to LACC, there was some piece somewhere and it had this little map of sort of all the courses, and what LA, it was all the, like you were saying, before a major, every single, all the articles come out, and this is golf in LA and here's all this other stuff. And they put Hillcrest, Wilshire, LACC, Riv, Bel Air. We weren't even on the map. So I thought that was sort of interesting that they left us out because we're right in the middle of the West Side. But I appreciate what you're saying. I think he did a great job. I love what he did with the Barranca. I thought that was
yeah,
brilliant stuff, and I think he did a great job.
I did a piece in the lead up just about the Barrancas of those courses. Just kind of, I had
Yes.
pictures of all of them, and just like the differences, and those are such a important feature of golf, in parts of Los Angeles, and it's really
Oh,
cool
for
to
sure.
compare how some have been manipulated more than others, and the effect that they have on the golf. But let me put you on the spot right now. What do you?
Please.
Maybe you've done this on your podcast before, but what are the top five Los Angeles golf courses for you?
The top five. Well. I certainly, I mean, LACC and Riv, are certainly 1 and 1A, and that's, as you know, a really
Well,
vigorous
which one's number
debate.
one?
For me, it's Riv,
Yeah,
and
same.
I just absolutely, I mean, again, I'm going to get in trouble now with all my friends at LACC, and they're both spectacular, and I
They
would,
can handle it.
but they can listen, they can definitely handle it. But yeah, I think Riv is just spectacular. And again, I don't know nearly as much about architecture as you do, but to me, that Thomas took this plain old, canyon. I mean, look, LAC has spectacular topography for the North Course. And again, I'm not saying anybody could have done what he did. I mean, it's a lot harder than that. But what he did at Riv, to me, with that plain thing, those green complexes, the testing it does of your, I mean, heck, I play the 10th hole 18 times and have an enjoyable day. I mean, I just think it's brilliant stuff. So that's certainly 1 and 1A. Beyond that, I think it falls off a lot. I think Bel Air, I think Tom did. I never played Bel Air before Tom redid it, so I don't have the before and after. Well, I think Bel Air is really good. I'd have to put that up there, and then I'd have to kind of go. If we're going to have LA be a larger area, I mean, I love the Valley Club. I know that's up in Santa Barbara,
It's a
so I'm
little
maybe
farther
a
outside the
little
circle, but
farther out, but circle for that. I mean, I just think it's such a. I mean, I just played it again a week ago for only the second time, so it's kind of fresh, a little recency bias. But I thought that's spectacular. What am I missing? I'd have to sort of think about, I think Rolling Hills, what David McClay kid down there was pretty good. But I'm sure I'm missing things, but those are the ones that come to mind.
yeah, just to finish up, just talking about touching on a subject we got into earlier, like when I look at the rankings and I see where things are, one of the biggest things that it almost angers me is when I see where Hillcrest is ranked in California. It's way down at like in the state, it's like 30 something,
And that reflects the redo, right? I mean, that's
that's
after,
all after the redo. Yeah,
yeah.
it's not the old. It's no evaluations from the old course, and I'm just like, all right, that's number three in LA for me. That's got to count for something more than that.
Yeah, but yeah, again, I don't not as fluent on the state rankings,
Especially when
but
one or two are both in our top 20. I mean, three should be like a lot higher than where it is.
yeah, that is interesting, right? Because it's not in the top 200 at all, right? Or
No,
anything
no, it's
close.
not.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not.
I just, I can't. I mean, yeah, I think it. Like I said, I think it went from a poor course to a great course,
Yeah.
and that's pretty. That's not easy to do.
Well, Kyle did a great job. Can't wait.
Kyle did an
Like you,
absolutely
I'm
great job.
really looking forward to seeing how he can
Well,
create
they've
for
sent
sure.
around some of the videos from it, and it looks pretty cool. But yeah, I think he's fantastic. And I never had the pleasure of playing the Cal Club, but we talked as if you listen to the podcast about that and that Cape hole that he pulled out of nowhere, and great stuff. He's terrific. But listen, this is awesome. This has been so much fun talking with you, Derek, and I truly mean it. If you're in LA, we'd be honored to have you. You can actually play Brentwood and see what you think. But yeah, I'm fine where the rankings are. I love the club, and that's just fine by me.
I hope to get to see you sometime on the golf course, Larry. This was
Very
fun.
good. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Bye bye.